All right. So I'm going to record just this last lesson for everybody real quick um, because I just want to make sure I get it posted for people um, early. I'm still holding the lessons after school or in the afternoon, but I just wanted to post this real quick. All right. So big number V, the first thing we need to do is the Holocaust. So the Holocaust is our definition here is the Holocaust is the systematic murder of nearly 13 million people by Nazi Germany, the majority of whom were Jewish, period. The Holocaust was an attempt to exterminate Jewish people from the world. So we talked a little bit earlier about Adolf Hitler's plans with the Holocaust or plans with Jewish people with demonizing them and making them seem terrible and blaming them for all the problems and stuff. Um, he started to round up Jewish people from around the country and from around all the countries they would conquer. They would send them into these ghettos in the middle of cities, and then from there onto these camps, these labor camps. This map right here is showing you where most of the camps are. The majority of the worst camps are in Poland. We're in Poland. They're not Polish, right? They're German, but the Germans built them in Poland. And this zoomed in section right here is right down here. This is where we're going to get some of the worst ones, Auschwitz and Birkenau. Auschwitz is the worst one. I think Auschwitz by itself kills about 1 million people. So our numbers, let's put our numbers in the notes. We have about 13 million total, of whom about 9 million of them are Jewish. The rest of them are Romani. We used to say gypsy, but gypsy's a racist term, so Romani. Um, Romani people or homosexuals or disabled people or other just undesirable groups, right? As they would move in, they would isolate different undesirable groups and throw them in here. We get a lot of different like Slavs and Russians and other things kind of mixed in as well. But overwhelmingly, the largest number is, of course, Jewish. Um, as the Soviets started to move through Poland and move through the Soviet and move into Germany, the Germans did something called the final solution. Put it in quotes, the final solution. That's the phrase that the Germans used. It's a phrase that the Germans used for the extermination of the Jewish people, and um, they would basically try to execute all of the Jews in these last days of the war. As the Soviets were coming in, the Soviets would find these camps and then just open the camps up and basically open them up and just let them go. At that point, the Soviets had already seen so much blood, guts, and suffering, and so many of their own POW camps and stuff that the Soviets, there wasn't really anything else they could do. They just opened up the camps. The Soviets are moving in over through this area, and so the Soviets are the ones getting to all the big camps. The United States is moving in through this area, so the United States does open up some camps. Some of these camps, as we get through these camps over here, largely as the Americans get closer, the Germans just try to kill as many people as they can before they abandon the camp. The story of the Holocaust is largely not an American story. The Americans don't really aren't really involved in a lot of the camps. There are very few Americans in the camps. Most of the camps are over on the Soviet side, and that the Americans, until pretty late in the war, didn't even know about the camps for quite a long time. And so it's not. This is a U.S. history class, so we don't spend a whole lot of time. I do a more extensive lesson when we teach a world history class or a European history class. What I want you to take away from this is the Holocaust is so big, so bad, so nasty, so terrible that when the world finds out what happened, it stands out in a war of terrible things, right? Our wars, World War II is basically an exercise in all of the worst things humans can do to each other. Um, and the Holocaust is particularly bad, particularly terrible. And so what happens is the Holocaust then becomes the reason why the world creates a completely new kind of international law, international courts, a definition of what genocide is, a definition of human rights abuses, a definition of what we call crimes against humanity. This is one of the big reasons why we invent the United Nations right after the war. This is one of these big reasons why we invent international politics, essentially. And so, if there's any kind of silver lining at all, it's that, it was the cause of that, the cause of the creation of international politics, international negotiations, and an attempt to avoid war in the future. It's uncomfortable to say there's any silver lining at all about the Holocaust, but there you go. If I have to say one, there it is. All right, let's move away from the Holocaust. The in-class people, we watched a video on it and stuff. We spent a little bit more time, but we're going to move on. All right, so let's go to the Pacific Theater. Big number W. Okay. So the Pacific Theater is led by primarily this man, General Douglas MacArthur. He's leading the army on this side, and Nimitz, Chester Nimitz, he's leading the Navy on this side. Unlike the European War, so I've mentioned this a couple times, where the Soviet Union was dominant in the European War, right? And the Soviets would have won the war even if the United States never got involved, which I think is true. The Pacific War is not at all, right? The Pacific War is totally America, almost completely America. England is involved, England and Australia. Australia is involved in some of these attacks. England's involved in like the land fighting in Asia, but the United States is definitely involved here. The United States war fighting in the Pacific is dominated by a policy of island hopping, where the United States is going from island to island to island. Okay. One of the problems is the Pacific Ocean is so big, so vast, that we can't do a D-Day style invasion on Japan, because our ships would be sailing all the way from California to Japan, and the Japanese Air Force or the Japanese Navy would be able to just destroy our ships before they even got remotely close. So we have to get islands closer. That way you can set up anti-aircraft guns, and you can set up fighter planes, and you can set up defenses against to protect ships and protect planes, right? And so once you've moved into one of these islands, you protect yourself, and then you move to the next one, you protect yourself, move to the next one, you protect yourself, move into the next one, protect yourself. Okay. As we get going on these island battles, one thing is becoming entirely clear on these island battles. Okay. If you look at these numbers here, the U.S. is going to lose 7,000. This is the Battle of Guadalcanal. It's an important battle on one of the islands. And the United States loses 7,000. Japan loses 31,000. Okay? Almost every one of these battles has a death toll like that, where the Japanese are fighting all the way to the last man, to their last breath. We have stories of a Japanese soldier who gets shot. He's laying on the ground, right? The Americans are taking care of other stuff. He grabs his gun, he starts to shoot Americans again. So they shoot him again a couple of times. They take his gun away. And so he grabs a knife out, and even with 3 or 4 bullets in his body, he's dragging himself on the ground, trying to stab the Americans, right? They take the knife away. And so then he drags himself over and tries to bite the Americans. Finally, the Americans shoot him in the head and kill him. There's a lot of that going on in this war, and it's becoming apparent. The Japanese have the cultural prohibition, a military prohibition, a political prohibition, a cultural prohibition on surrendering. There's nothing worse that you can do than surrender, and they're not going to surrender. They're fighting until the last moment. I'm going to talk about the Battle of Iwo Jima. Go ahead and make this the next number, X. The Battle of Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima is Iwo Jima is basically just a rock, like a little rock near Japan. It's pretty close to Japan. This becomes one of the most important battles of the time. Important for a couple of reasons. Here's our death toll. By this point, the Japanese are running out, right? The Japanese are starting to run out of people. They're no longer having 30, 40,000 people on an island. They're having 20,000 people on an island now. This matters. The reason why Iwo Jima matters is for two big reasons. Okay, one, once we take over Iwo Jima, we're close enough to bomb Japan. Okay, so we can take over Iwo Jima, we can bomb Japan basically 24 hours a day and just bomb it forever. The second reason why it's important is because of this picture. This is maybe the most famous picture in all of American history. Probably is. I'm sure you've seen it a million cajillion times. This is the raising the flag over Iwo Jima. There's a couple of things that are kind of interesting. Interesting about this. First off, the picture is staged. The Marines had lifted the flag up, and then the photographer said, "Oh, that would have been a good picture." So the Marines take the flag down, and then they go and kind of pose and put it back up again. So that's fine. I don't think that really matters. It's just kind of something interesting. There's something else that comes up that when we're in basic training, they teach us that of the 5 people in the picture, 2 of them die in combat. 1 of them dies in suicide. Hold on just a moment. Oh, wait. Sorry about that. Had a teacher come into my room. Okay, so the Battle of Iwo Jima, we get taught that 3 of the men die, 1 of them commits suicide, 1 survives, and it's kind of something that gets drilled in your head that that this is the price that we pay to raise the flag over places like this, and it's something that we think about quite a bit. Okay, so let's go. Why? Big number Y. Big number Y is going to be the bombing of Japan. All right, so we start off with fire bombings, like similar to how we were using in Europe. These are big fueled air bombs, and we firebomb these cities. Unfortunately for the Japanese, Tokyo is a city of wood at this time. The German cities were made out of stone or brick, right? And so they didn't burn the same way. But when you light that fire across Tokyo, Tokyo burns for days, for more than 48 hours, Tokyo burns, and it kills over 100,000 people. I've seen some numbers as high as 150,000 people burn. The United States is going to be dropping bombs like this all over Japan for a while, all the way up until August, when the United States has finally finished inventing the atom bomb. This atomic program called Manhattan Project had been in the works for a couple of years. Primarily, it's being run by Jewish immigrants. Jewish immigrants, a lot of them are Jews who had escaped out of Germany, and the United States took them in. And they invent the nuclear bomb. They dropped the first one in Las Cruces, New Mexico, as a test, to which Oppenheimer says, "I have gazed upon this and I have become death," right? Albert Einstein, who was on the team, he says, upon seeing the nuclear bomb, he says, "I don't know what World War III will be fought, what weapons World War III will be fought with, but surely World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." These bombs are so big that an entire city can be hit with just one bomb. We drop it on Hiroshima in August 6th, and we kill somewhere in excess of 100,000 people on that day. And then on August 9th, we drop it on Nagasaki, kill another 70 to 80,000 people. And then finally, Japan surrenders after that. This represents the end of the war. A lot of people were going to criticize President Truman. Why would he do this? Why drop these bombs? There's a couple reasons. First, we're already dropping bombs. We're already in the strategic bombing business. We're already dropping fire bombs. We're already dropping bombs across Europe, across Asia. So a bigger bomb is just another step, right? Second, seeing how the Japanese are fighting on every single island. When we get to Okinawa, we have children fighting, women fighting, we have people, every single person fighting. The prospect of landing on Japan with 70, 80 million people is daunting, right? So we're trying to shock them, trying to get them to surrender. The third, the Soviet Union was coming. Europe was done. Nazis were gone, and the Soviets were moving forces into the Asia. And the United States doesn't trust the Soviet Union, and doesn't trust Stalin. They think Stalin's going to spread communism around, and so the United States is trying to end the war before the Soviets get there. Well, war's over. Oh, here's an image. This picture on the side, this is the targeting camera from the Enola Gay, the plane, as it flew over Hiroshima on the day of the bomb. This is the next day when they flew over and got the same lat-long coordinates. So you can see the city is gone. Yeah. All right, big number Z. This is our death toll for the war. Take a look at these graphs, okay? So these graphs, the red represents military death, right? These are soldiers dying in combat. The orange represents civilian deaths. These are not soldiers. These are going to be people dying in like bombings and stuff. This also includes people dying in the Holocaust. In fact, a large section of this is the Holocaust. People dying in the Holocaust in like labor camps and in concentration camps. This also includes the camps that the Japanese were running. This also includes the bombing campaigns of Americans dropping bombs on Japan, on Germany and stuff. That would be the majority of this through here. Some of this is the Holocaust, and a lot of this is bombing campaigns. This would also include the nuclear bombs in there. The blue line represents the percentage of the population, right? So you can see here, the Soviet Union loses 24 million people, and they lose 13% of the population. You may look at this and say Lithuania only loses, less than 1 million people, but Lithuania is very, very small. Lithuania walks away with 13, 14% of its entire population gone. Latvia as well. Poland, I've said this a couple times, Poland is the big loser of the war. I think the Soviets lose more people, China loses more people, but Poland didn't even fight. Poland didn't start a fight with anybody. They get invaded by the Germans, invaded by the Soviets, and they're the primary ground where the Holocaust is taking place. Poland walks away with losing almost a fifth of its population. Here's our scale. You can see this, right? You can see this. This is the Eastern Front of Europe. I've said this a couple times. The Eastern Front is so big, so massive, so bloody, so terrible. And this is the Western Front, right? This is much, much smaller. This is the entire Pacific War. It's just that sliver, right? So when we talk about the Soviet Union losing people, when we talk about how many dead there are, that's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. So you can see these, 14% of the Soviet Union, 17% of Poland. The United States loses relatively few. We lose 418,000 dead. That's a big number, right? But not compared to 24 million, right? Not compared to 7 million, not compared to 20 million, not compared to, not compared to these big numbers. And 418,000 people relative for the United States, the US is a big place, right? It's a really, really big place. It's got lots of people. So the US comes out of this war better than before we got in, okay? Our worldwide deaths are somewhere between 60 and 85 million. This depends on how you count a lot of the Soviet deaths, because the Soviet Union had a lot of deaths right before the war that are kind of related, but not exactly related. So it depends on how you count the Soviet deaths. Let's take a look at what the day after the war looks like. Here's Warsaw, Poland. Here you go, Warsaw, Poland. St. Lo, France. It's a city in the north of France. Cologne, Germany. The Germans had begged the United States to leave this cathedral alone, and the US agreed to leave the cathedral alone if the Germans abandoned everything around it, and they did. They abandoned everything around it. And so Dresden, Germany. There's a cathedral that the United States did not leave alone. Berlin, Germany. Leningrad, Russia, the Soviet Union. Today, this is St. Petersburg. Liverpool, England. Never invaded, but bombed every day. London, Nagasaki, Yokohama, New York. Right? New York is walking away, looking fine. I'm saying this because by the end of this war, the United States is better than it ever was. The United States is economically strong, it's militarily strong, and the United States is looking out over a world that has been burned to the ground. Right? Europe has been destroyed, Asia has been destroyed, millions and tens of millions of people are dead, and the United States is no longer in the Great Depression. Great Depression's over, it's done. The US economy is huge, massive at this time period. The US economy is like 2/3 of the world at this point. That share is going to continue to shrink, not because the United States is stupid or lazy or weak or something, right? But the United States share will shrink because the other countries will start to grow again, right? Germany, France, England, the Soviet Union, China, Japan, they're all going to start to repair themselves and they're all going to get bigger chunks of that pie. The pie is getting bigger as we go. This is it for Q2. We'll start with the Cold War next week. All right. Thank you. And some of you I'll see in class this afternoon.